As a caregiver, you are constantly experiencing grief. Now, some of you may have just shook your head and others may be surprised to hear that. Christine Vaughn Davies is here to talk to us today, and she actually shared that anytime there is change, there is grief. We are constantly in a state of change. So therefore, there's a lot of grief. And as caregivers, we are not only grieving our own change, but the changes that come within our practice. So this conversation is so good and so helpful. It is exactly what our aching caregiving hearts need. So Reverend Christine Vaughn Davies is an ordained Presbyterian minister, clinical educator in pastoral care, and spiritual director and hospital chaplain. So as a writer, speaker, Christine shares stories from her chaplaincy work with the hope that it helps normalize grief and allow people to live more fully in the moment. She educates about grief, loss, and the importance of advanced care planning. Christine helps people become more effective listeners as caregivers, and she guides individuals on how to care for themselves wholeheartedly in something she calls soulful self-care. So Christine brings a wealth of wisdom. She has been a hospital chaplain for over 2 decades, pastoral educator, cognitive behavioral therapist, and healthcare administrator. She is going to bring some wisdom today, and I want you to listen in and really soak in this wisdom and apply it to your caregiving. Let's go. If you're done running on empty, surviving shift to shift, and feeling life fatigue, then you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Shan Wright, registered nurse, holistic life coach, and mama of 4 who found her way through burnout and anxiety to peace and purpose with faith-based practices and God's design for whole person wellness. Here, I help nurses like you recover from burnout, regulate your nervous system, reconnect with God, and discover your identity beyond the badge. Are you ready to start caring for you the way you care for everyone else? I am. Go reheat that coffee again, and let's beat burnout together. What if I told you in just 5 minutes, you're going to reset your nervous system, recalibrate your mind, and reconnect with the truth of your identity? Yes, that's all it takes. I've created the STAT protocol. This is a 5-minute nervous system reset and mental shift for burnout nurses. If you're exhausted, bone tired, soul tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, I've got you. This guide is your permission slip to pause, breathe, and remember who you are beneath the scrubs. You can grab it right now at www.theshanwright.com/stat. The link is also in the show notes. This is a free gift. Go grab it right now and find rest for your soul. Welcome to the show, Christine. I am so happy to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here and just love the message that you're bringing with your podcast, and know that so many people listening will find it so rewarding.
Thank you so much. Okay, so first, I was once the chaplain for my high school girls basketball team. I was on the team.
Fun.
I played basketball since like 6th grade. And I think it was just my senior year that my coach was like, I want to make you the chaplain. And I had no idea what she really meant by that. But I think I was my Bible teacher. He was a chaplain for a local baseball team, like a minor league baseball team. So I was like, well, I guess I kind of just do what he does. Like I didn't even know, but she kind of guided me, I guess. But I loved that role. I loved that. We actually memorized all of Romans 12 that year together as a team and would say it before and after every game and practice. I feel like that's the main thing I helped them with, but I don't know, probably did some other things. But I think that really affected my job today and what I'm doing, my work today. So tell me how you became a chaplain, minister, spiritual director. I would love to know the highlights of your testimony, your story, and then how you got to where you are.
Of course. And I don't know much about sports chaplaincy since I'm in the hospital arena, but I have to say one of my dream jobs would be the chaplain at the Olympics, because there are a lot of chaplains there as well. I just think that's so cool.
That would be cool.
But I am fully ensconced in healthcare. So I began my journey as a young person growing up, my parents attended the local Presbyterian church. And much to everyone's surprise, I really took to it and loved going to youth group and was in the bell choir and was a youth deacon, all those sorts of things. And I was a pretty precocious kid, and I don't remember a time where I didn't believe in God. It was just always a part of my life. And I remember thinking from a very young age, God wants me to help the most people possible. How can I do that? And I was convinced I was going to do it through the field of medicine. It probably helped that my mom was a nurse, so she kind of fanned that flame a little bit.
Yeah.
But I would read, the Merck Medical Dictionary for fun and research Doctors Without Borders. And I thought that was where my life was going to go. And I worked for a time as an emergency medical technician in the backs of ambulances. And it was there that I realized, while I could do minor things, wound repair and ensuring safe transport to the hospital, a lot of what I was doing was holding patients' hands while they were scared and saying, like, why is this happening? Am I going to be okay? And we can't necessarily fix that, but I could bear witness to it and be present with them in it. And it was around the same time that I had my own health diagnoses, and it took a long time to figure out what that was going to be and lots of hospitalizations. And I wound up getting diagnosed with generalized epilepsy, which I'm happy to say is fairly well under control now. And this was many years ago. But it was around that time where I was in and out of hospitals. And I, encountered some bedside manners, particularly from some of the physicians I was working with, where I just wasn't feeling seen and heard. And, so much of medicine, especially around a new diagnosis, can be guesswork and all the medications and the side effects. And it was around that time the pastor at the church that I was attending, she was relatively new there. She took me out for lunch, or it was dinner at an Italian restaurant. And just talked with me about how this was impacting my life, what this was doing to my relationship with God. And it was through that. And several years later, I was like, oh, that was spiritual care. That was pastoral care. That's what I want to do. And I recognize there's more than one way to help people. And this could be a way to help people. And so I took a little twist and turn. I went to seminary. I also went to social work school. So I worked as a therapist for a little bit of time. But I really felt drawn to be back in the hospital setting, did a chaplaincy internship and then a residency. And now I teach those residency programs, and I lead the hospital chaplaincy department at Robert Johnson in New Brunswick, New Jersey.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. First, I didn't know you were in Jersey. I'm a Delaware girl. So
Oh, okay.
I'm
Yes, Jersey, born and raised. I never thought I'd still be living here, but here we go.
Yeah, I'm in Indiana now. So I did leave Delaware, although I never thought I would. But that is so cool. I love how people can speak into your life, be wise counsel. So you had talked about, being able to hold people's hands when they're going through like hard times and scary times. And that's also a heartbeat of mine, and why I actually worked in HEMONC for my whole nursing career. There was definitely many times I just wanted to do that, but then you're pulled in a million different directions.
Yeah. You don't have the luxury of the time that the chaplains have. Mm-hmm.
You don't. As nurses, we experience what I call like cumulative grief. Like we don't get to process our grief, and then it just piles on. We witness all these losses shift after shift without time to process it. I know you talk about, in your work, you've talked about normalizing grief, the different types of loss. Can you help our listeners understand the different types of loss that healthcare workers experience beyond patient death? Because I think that's obviously the obvious one, but what else do they experience as far as grief and loss, how this unprocessed grief shows up?
Yeah, so first I want to say that as a nurse, you are what's called a spiritual care generalist. So that desire to hold the hand, seeing the human as more than just their diagnosis or, their medication or what's going on with them physically. You're caring for the whole emotional, spiritual realm of that person. And I think we don't talk about that enough. And so anytime I'm talking with nurses and physicians, I really like to emphasize chaplains, we're the specialists. So you call us in when you need us, but a lot of the work that you're doing day in and day out falls under the generalist category.
Yeah.
And yes, there's going to be a time where you may need to tap us in to help. And so I work with a lot of nurses around helping them to really debrief from some traumatic events that can go on. But over time too, there is just so much layers upon layers of loss. We all know the death type of loss, right? Like that one is obvious to us in our society. But other types of losses can include simple relationship loss. So we see this a lot of times in healthcare settings where there's turnover. People retire, people get a new job or a promotion. Like, so you're losing your colleagues, which even if it's a celebratory event and you're happy for them, there's still a loss there. You know, that it might be your work bestie is no longer there. Or sometimes I see this when there's, our hospital, we just, kind of opened a new unit. And so nurses went from, one location to a different location. And that actually brings some loss to it. Even though the new unit is beautiful, I sometimes still hear nurses talk about, oh, I liked our old ED, which was, 10 years ago at this point, because we were closer together and we got to see each other more. So there's all of those little types of losses that come up. The other piece with the relationship loss that I see sometimes is we have patients that get better. And when people are discharged, that's usually a good thing for them. But that's a loss. Our relationships in the hospital setting are so short term. So I've seen nurses crying over saying goodbye to someone who was, hopefully they were never going to see again. But that's the idea, is that they're never going to see them again. And so they don't know the end of that story.
Oh,
and
I feel that
resonate
strongly because being on HEMONC, we had people for months and months at a time, even 6 months and then they would come back. They would go through a cycle of treatment. And then if they were improving, they'd be there for 2 months and then they come back 6 months later for another month, 2 months. Like, you really got to know people. And there were many times that I definitely cried and like, I'm going to miss this person.
Yeah. Even though you are happy for them and it's the exact, journey that you want for them. There is still this, you're always having to meet new people, to care for them and hopefully, send them on their healthy journey. It's actually, that's one of the reasons that I started doing spiritual direction as well. In COVID, I was, we were all very much, I think, burned out, and many of us have PTSD from being in healthcare in that time. But for me, that's when it was I was acutely aware of the fact that all of my relationships with patients and families were so short term. And I needed to balance that out in my own life by opening up my own spiritual practice where I could be with people for years on end and see their journey and what God was doing over the course of time, not just, in their most vulnerable or crisis moments.
Yes.
And so that's been a beautiful counterbalance for me.
Yeah, good. I kind of interrupted you, but did you get to finish your thought on loss and how we can process this grief?
So I think the first thing that we can do when it comes to losses is to name it. Because sometimes if we don't name it, we don't know necessarily what it is even, and we just kind of feel, weird about it, or we think that, we're overreacting to things. But if we can name something as a loss, I think that helps us. They say if you name it, you can tame it. Just that acknowledgement. And, my theory around loss, my husband likes to refer to me as the queen of grief, because I hold this mentality of loss comes with every change in life, a good change or, more of a negative change, but loss is there. Anytime there's loss, there's change. Or I'm sorry, anytime there's change, there's loss. And change is constant. So we are always grieving something. An example I like to refer to is, I used to officiate a lot of weddings on the side. And I remember being at a rehearsal dinner and the bride's mother was crying. And I thought, oh no, does she not like the groom? What's going on? So I kind of go over next to her and I'm like, what's going on, Mrs. Smith? And she said, well, I just realized after tomorrow, I'm no longer going to be her emergency contact anymore. So she loved the groom, but the relationship was changing, and that was a loss, and that had to be grieved. And so we see that manifold in nursing and healthcare, just all of those minor losses. So your listeners might be thinking, oh, I'm not grieving anything major, but I would invite you to like think back, even over the last 6 months or the last year, what are the major changes that have happened to you? And how might there be loss there? And giving a name to it can help people feel like they have a sense of agency around it.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. I actually experienced a lot of grief this year, did some podcasts and content on it. And that is one of the things that I shared too. And it helped so much because, I just know it helped me in my grieving to recognize how much I was being affected and not, pushing through it and saying, life moves on. I got to move. It's like, no, this really hurts. And why does it hurt? And how does it hurt? And that's really good.
Yeah, I often ask when I'm working with my spiritual direction clients, I'm like, well, what would you say to a friend that's going through this right now? Because oftentimes we are more gracious with our response to our friends and to other people. And a lot of individuals, myself included, we have that negative self-talk when it comes to us. And we perpetuate those myths of, oh, I should be over this by now, or this shouldn't impact me as much. When we know that grief has no timeline, it is always with us. We never move on from it. We move through with it.
Yeah, we do. We have to move through it. I think it affects us in a lot of ways. And I think a common way that grief can really rock a person is spiritually. Because if they do have this belief that, God created everything, is the master of everything, it's like, why is this happening? Those questions of why come up. And so I think for many nurses, repeated exposure of death and suffering and these situation and illnesses and that don't make sense and break our hearts can actually break their faith too. So some of us have, I've known people that have walked away from God because they couldn't reconcile what they were seeing with what they believed. Can you speak to this a little bit on how, our grief affects our spiritual lives?
Absolutely. I see this all the time. And I think it's especially true when we're witnessing deaths that could have been prevented. So I see this a lot when I'm working in the trauma bay and with young people or people our own age or people who remind us of someone in our life. And then to your point, just the sheer volume and magnitude. So the one thing I do recommend for anyone working in healthcare is because you are seeing more sorrow and suffering than the average person, you almost have to double the amount of joy that you are receiving into your life to counterbalance that.
That's good.
I remember when I was going through my chaplaincy residency and, dealing with multiple deaths a day, and I realized, oh, I can't watch dramatic movies anymore. I can only watch comedies, or I need to make sure that I am, laughing or smiling or doing something that I love. I worked with a physician who told me that one of the ways she got through COVID was by taking online tap dancing classes. She's like, I just needed to smile more. And by doing that, I was always smiling because I wasn't, smiling at work when I was having to deliver, heart-wrenching news to individuals. So that's my first piece. But to the larger question of how it impacts us. So the why is the number one question I hear in the hospital, and I hear it from hospital staff, and I also hear it from patients and patients' families. Sometimes my new interns, when they're starting out, they think that they have to answer the question and give a sermon on theodicy or suffering in the world. I'm like, no, we're leaving that. That's not. People aren't necessarily looking for the answer, but they're wanting a place to express the question. And there's been research done that shows the why question, especially in a crisis moment, is more about lamentation. So it's helping people to say, you can bring this to God. You can pray those psalms of lament. You can yell those psalms of lament to be in relationship. And you're right, there is a lot of disconnection that can happen, or I see a lot of anger at God as well. And I think one of the reasons that we see it as chaplains a lot is because individuals that are a part of a faith community, whether it's a church or a mosque or a synagogue, feel like they're not allowed to tell their clergy that they are having these feelings. They worry that it might be blasphemous to be
Mm.
angry at God. And so a lot of what I'm doing with clients or with patients and staff members is making space for that anger to say, no, of course you're going to have
Mhm.
anger at God. The important thing is, how are you expressing that? How are you remaining in relationship? So I encourage people, I'm like, go outside and yell, yell at God, do whatever you need to express who you are. God created you to have these emotions. Just like we get, I don't know about you, but like I get mad at my husband on a weekly basis. To be in relationship with someone is to have that conflict and have that anger. And it's really what we do with it. And so sometimes giving people that permission to say, I don't know why this is happening, but I'm so upset and I don't know where God is in this, is a huge step toward that spiritual healing.
Yeah, good. Okay, so speaking of that, of things that we say, one of the hardest parts of nursing, I don't know, one of maybe of many, is knowing what to say when someone is dying or grieving. And I know I was in this position a lot, being that, the oncologist would go in and say, there's nothing else we can
Mhm,
do. And then they
mhm,
would leave. And the really kind physicians would come over and say, just warning, I just told your patient this. But other
mhm.
times they didn't tell us. And we would
Oh
walk
my
in
goodness. What a surprise to
to
walk into.
oh,
That's so
hey,
unfair.
what are you
Mm-hmm.
watching today on TV? You're like, just trying to
Mm-hmm.
make small talk. So from your experience as a chaplain and educator, what are the most common things we say that actually create more harm in that receiving that they've just gotten of this news? What a big rule is, do no harm, but like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we say things and they affect the wound that was just
Mm-hmm.
implanted. So what can we do and what can we say that creates this comfort and brings connection to the
Yeah.
patient?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, so I will start with what not to say,
Yeah.
which are some of those religious platitudes that I think come from a well-meaning place,
Yeah.
but have an element of spiritual toxicity to them, that can make people feel worse. So things like, well, God wanted another angel.
Yeah.
I've heard people say that, not realizing really the damage that can be done. Because if you're saying that to me, I'm a parent that just lost my child in the hospital.
Yeah.
I'm going to think, if that's true, I'm going to think, well, God's a real jerk then, if that's what had to happen.
Yeah.
Or things like, it'll get better with time, or you just have to have faith. Everything happens for a reason is another phrase that, again, that may be helpful in your own life and in your own belief system and theology. But the problem comes when we put that on to other people. Because a lot of what we're doing in that time, and the question of why comes up, is the term is spiritual or existential meaning making. We're
Yeah.
trying to make meaning of
Yeah.
this awful thing that has happened. And we're in the crisis moment when the thing is happening. And we're not going to see the meaning that that person or that family might be able to make of it, years down the road. And
Mhm.
we know, even in our own lives, when we're going through something, we don't know why we're going through it at the time. Even as I shared my story of how I got into this work, I can look back. That was decades upon decades ago. And now I'm like, okay, now I see the path. But when we're in it, we can't see it. And so when people are giving us the reasons why this is happening, that kind of robs us from that meaning making experience.
Mhm.
So, what to do instead? I recommend, it might sound a little irreverent, but I recommend that people show up and shut up. The words don't matter as
Yeah.
much as your presence,
Yeah.
especially in nursing. Like that warm smile, that being attentive to everyone's needs. I
Mhm.
sometimes tell my chaplain interns, especially when there is a death, and we know sometimes deaths in the hospital can take a while, and the family is sometimes there keeping vigil, especially in the ICU. I encourage them to do something I call spiritual hovering. So you're just checking in and out, and you're assessing whether or not the family might need space. Or when I'm there at a death and there's one family member, they may say, no, 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 don't leave me. I can't do this by myself. So then
Mhm.
I'm there all the time. So as a nurse, you're assessing like, okay, what might they need in this situation? And it's
Yeah.
usually not about words because the words aren't going to impact them in the same way that you being there, you honoring what's happening. You might be the last person that sees their loved one alive. And so that
Hmm.
is actually really sacred ground to be
Yeah.
in. And hopefully it empowers your nurse listeners to know they don't need to say anything. They can just be there and honor what's happening. It can be as simple as, patting that back of that individual or realizing, you know what, they haven't eaten all day. Let me get that, comfort bereavement tray up here, or helping them to maybe say a final goodbye to their loved one. Ask them if they've done that. Of course, you can call a chaplain if you're in a hospital with a chaplain, and they will help guide you through it as well.
Yeah, that's good. I think sometimes when we've gone through it ourselves, I think it helps a little bit to know what we needed in that time.
Mhm.
But I know as I was young, you come
Mhm.
right out of college
Mhm.
and you're like shocked at how much emotional trauma you deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, and then you have to go right on to the next patient
Yeah.
in the next room. And it is. We did a study a few years ago before COVID of what are some of the predictors of nursing burnout and what can help. And peer support was one of them. So
Hmm.
knowing that you have colleagues that you can talk to and that you're not alone in it, especially because in healthcare, it's hard to then come home to your family who doesn't get it and tell them about your day. And sometimes you don't want to because you don't want to relive it. So having colleagues who have your back. And then another piece that came out of it was having leadership who understood and who
Yeah.
could also have that authentic connection with you and the work that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely important. Okay. So, along those lines, my tagline for my podcast is faith based practices to holistically
Mm.
care for you. But I think you call the same thing, basically the same thing, a
Hmm.
soulful self-care.
Yep.
And so, yeah, share with us some ways that nurses who are exhausted, emotionally depleted, running on empty, how they can develop spiritual practices in their
Mm.
life and give them
Hmm.
themselves that
Hmm.
soulful self-care.
Yeah, so oftentimes when we think of self-care, we think of, the candles and the bubble bath and all the trappings of consumerism that come with that. And it's a, multi-trillion dollar industry at this point, wellness. And those things are lovely. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I think we need to incorporate that self-care and that soulful and spiritual self-care on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so I like to ask people a couple of questions, kind of my self-care audit,
Yeah.
if you would. The first is what helps you reconnect
Yeah.
to your authentic self?
Hmm.
Because this is the difference with restorative care versus, just getting through the day. I
Yeah.
know when I've had a rough day and I come home, sometimes I'm so tired and burned out that I just want to scroll on my phone. And I
Yeah.
know scrolling on my phone doesn't actually help me connect to my authentic self.
Yeah.
And so it's about identifying, okay, what actually is self-care versus more of like a numbing activity.
Right.
And so that's another question I ask, like numbing versus engaging. How are you present in your care for yourself instead of distracted by your pain? And I
Hmm.
see this with nurses a lot because when I know a nurse has been through a difficult shift or had a patient that died, part of our role as chaplains is that we are checking in with the staff as well. We're there for the
Yeah.
patients, we're there for the families, we're there for the staff. And I'll usually ask the nurse, I'm like, oh, so what are you going to do when you go home from your shift to care for yourself tonight? And some like that I ask that question. Some feel like they're put on notice with that question. But I have to say, the number of nursing staff that tell me, "Oh, well, tonight I'm just going to make sure that it's an extra large pour of wine." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Look, I like wine. I can't drink it anymore because it doesn't agree with me." But there's a difference between, actually mindfully consuming something and then
Yeah.
having that, kind of turn into a problem. We see the same thing. I have a lot of younger students and they tell me, how much hours they spend on Netflix and YouTube and, watching all these things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's very different if it's like your favorite TV show and you're like, I'm going to be present and watch this versus if you're, on your phone while you're watching, and you're watching episode after episode. So really thinking about intentionality in our soulful self-care. And then the other two questions I'd like to ask are, what is your care for future self? So what is something that you can do today to care for yourself tomorrow? So when I ask nurses this question, they say, well, you know what? I could probably pack a lunch that is, or a dinner, depending on the shift, that's like more nutritious and that I'll actually get to eat, versus thinking I'm going to go to the cafeteria, never having time to actually go, never eating on my shift, and then coming home, cranky or hangry.
Yeah.
So something as simple as that, that is self-care. Or, it's not fun to like do laundry, but doing laundry, on the day that you have off, so that that's not one more thing you have to do when you're working a 12-hour shift, is actually a way of caring for your future self. And then the last question I like to ask is protective nature. Like, how can you set boundaries to ensure that you are not depleted? Because I'm guessing some of your listeners fall in this category. Those of us that are in this professional caregiving relationships, oftentimes other relationships in our lives as well have demands on us. And because you are so good at caring for people, a lot of times we attract people in our lives who need a lot of care from us. I don't know if this resonates. And so sometimes it's recognizing, okay, is this a life-giving relationship for me? Is this a life-draining relationship with me? And if it's someone that I'm going to still be in contact with, it's about setting boundaries. So I might say to someone from my family that calls me for advice all the time, I might say, okay, I'm going to call you on my commute, so you get 20 minutes to talk to me once a week. Like, that's going to be our date, versus, you texting me all the time, needing something, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So really looking at your life and doing an audit of, okay, what can I incorporate in these larger questions? And then there's also smaller moments. So I like to encourage people to think about spiritual habit stacking. Because a lot of times people tell me, well, I don't have time for spiritual practices. I would love to read my Bible for, 20 minutes a day, or meditate, and I just don't have time, which I understand. None of us have time. This is a busy life that we are all living. And so for nurses, I say, what are some of the things that you can do in the course of your day that doesn't add time, but you're being mindful in the moment?
Yeah.
So the one that people like is, if you work in healthcare, you are always washing your hands, right? You're either using the sanitizer or using the water and soap. And so I've encouraged people, think about that. Every time you're washing your hands, you say a prayer, or you take a deep breath. And it doesn't have to be a long prayer. It could just be, God be with me today. Or it could be one word even. Sometimes I tell people just focus on, there's a longer form prayer called centering prayer that we use in the Christian circles, where you just pick like one word for God and say that to yourself. You can be doing that as you're changing, the IV pump. So looking for cues and thinking about how do I be more intentional at looping this all into my life.
Yes. Oh, so good.
I'll give you another example too that some of our nurses like. So we sometimes pass out cotton balls in a Ziploc bag that we have sprayed with lavender essential oil, and encourage people to pick them, just put them in their pockets. And if they are having a stressful day, just pull it out, sniff it a little bit, and allow the lavender to, help them remember to reset. And so that's another popular one, especially people are like, oh, I'm not really into the God thing. I'm like, okay, well, let's try this. This might be something that can help you.
Oh, that is great. That is great. I mean, your sense of smell is, I think, huge. That's a really good tip.
And there's lots of not so good smells in the hospital.
Exactly. So. In the hospital, we used to put just peppermint oil like in our nostrils.
I used to use Vaseline when I was on the ambulance.
Yeah. Okay. So I could talk to you for so long, but I have one more question I want to ask just to get to know you a little bit more personally. So I hear you live on a small farm, chasing chickens and chauffeuring your kids around. So, which sounds beautiful and amazing and chaotic, but
yes, all of those things.
Yeah. How do you practice what you preach? What are some of your favorite spiritual rhythms?
Yeah. So one of the best things I can do is just take a walk outside on my property. And that's part of what drew me to living the life that I do. There are certainly times where I'm like, okay, like the goats are screaming and they need attention, or, this thing got loose, or this, fence needs repair. And so there's no shortage of more work, but something about, digging in the garden or feeling the wind through the trees as I'm walking around, that's really a shortcut to God for me. And so that's something that I try to incorporate throughout my life. It's a little hard now because we're recording this when it's cold. And
Yes.
just the other day, I was outside with my 8-year-old. He's like, "Mom, why is the ground crunchy?" I was like, "Oh, that's because it's frozen. That's what
Yeah.
that is." And relatedly, I think I've really embraced embodiment
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that moving my body is a way of also being in relationship with God. And I
Yeah.
feel more settled. What I don't like exercising, it is not my favorite thing to do. But if I can also incorporate nature and go for a run and listen to the bird song in the way that allows me to just be more present to my life and to the world around me, that does help connect me as well. And then lastly, I would say I do a lot of relational work as a chaplain and as a spiritual director. And so I need those professional relationships in my life as well. So I have my own therapist, I have my own
Yeah.
spiritual director. I used to have a great chiropractor, but he just retired. So I gotta find a new one of those. But having
Yeah.
paid people on my staff to help care for me, and then my unpaid friends too, or sometimes my unpaid
Yeah.
therapists. So making sure that I am, meeting regularly with friends, some who get the work and do the same work I do, and some who do completely different work
Yeah.
and can help me really have a different perspective on things.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Thank you
Mhm.
for sharing all your wisdom with us. Again, I could just talk to you forever, but we've got to go so that can be digestible. Can you share with us where we can find you? And I think you have a free gift for the listeners as well. We'll put that in the show notes, but you can just mention it.
Perfect. So my free gift is actually similar to what we were talking about before. It's 5 simple spiritual practices you can try right now,
Yeah.
because they can be simple. And so I really try to make that easy for you. And so you can download that on my website, and the link will be below. My website is christinevdavies.com /free gift for that. And otherwise, I'm on Substack. I do a lot of writing about spirituality. I write a lot of vignettes from the hospital work that I do. Of course, they're all composites, all identifying information about patients and families and staff have been changed. But the idea is there are such rich life lessons
Yeah.
that we can take from that and apply to our daily lives. So you can find me on Substack. And if people are interested in spiritual direction and want to work with a spiritual director, feel free to reach out to me. Even if I'm not going to be a good fit, I will help you find someone who may be a good fit, especially if you're wanting to do it in person and you're not in New Jersey. I understand that. But I do meet with a lot of people on Zoom as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. It's been so fun.
Yeah, it's a joy to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
I pray that blessed you, and it would bless me big if you would share the show with a friend or write a review. It will only take a few minutes, and it's the best way for people to find the show too. I would love to connect over on Instagram @theshanwright, or you can email me hello@theshanwright.com. And until next time, may the Lord's face shine upon you and give you peace. Shalom.